Hi, welcome. The Friends of the Bronxville Library are pleased to welcome you today to an afternoon with John Simon. Mr. Simon is an author of over 20 books on literary, theater, and film critic. He was a contributor to the New York Times Book Review, the Washington Post, and the New York Magazine. He is currently the theater critic for the Westchester Chronicle and the Yonkers Tribune. Mr. Simons has a blog called John Simons Uncensored and a website and a Facebook page, which it's being filmed for. After Mr. Simon speaks, we will have a reception outside following, and some copies of his books will be available. Thank you, and welcome, Mr. Simon.
Thank you. Thank you. This is a bad time for criticism. Critics are being let go all over the place, or not being hired in many places. And yet it's a time when criticism is perhaps needed more than ever, because there's something called, in German, because it originated in Germany, called Regietheater, or director's theater, in which movement, if it is a movement, directors assume the role of the author, sometimes changing texts, certainly cutting them, sometimes rewriting them, but in all cases doing funny things to the text. There are some egregious examples from Germany, but also from other countries. For example, there has been especially in opera, there's been a Madame Butterfly in which Pinkerton wore a corset, and right at the beginning of the opera got oral sex from Suzuki, butterflies made, and after that it went even downhill from there. There's been a production of Ibsen's masterpiece, The Master Builder, in which the master builder stuck a test tube into his anus and then spread what came out on the canvas, which is perfectly absurd, but it's all part of Regietheater, or director's theater. And it's all over the place in Europe. And what's all over the place in Europe sooner or later finds its way over here. But we should try to combat it for all we are worth. Now, I'm going to read to you a little bit of my theater criticism, a little of my film criticism, and a tiny bit about my music writing, which I don't call criticism, I call it appreciation. So bear with me. Well, there is now about to open a very interesting exhibit at the Public Library of the Performing Arts in the city, in Manhattan. It's a Noel Coward exhibition with all kinds of Coward material on exhibit. And in keeping with that, I will read you 2 reviews of one of his best plays, Private Lives. There was one production recently on Broadway, which if you missed, you didn't miss very much. But on the other hand, it does get revived fairly often. So this was a version of it with Liz Taylor and Richard Burton some years ago. Noel Coward's Private Lives was one of the most coruscating comedies in the English language, and will be so again, starting July 18, or whenever Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor are through playing it. Actually, that's not what they're really playing. Miss Taylor is all too palpably repeating her imperious, dying millionairess, Mrs. Goforth, from Boom, Joseph Losey's even more dreadful movie version of The Milk Train Doesn't Stop Here Anymore. What Burton is doing is less clear. It would seem to be some combination of a robot from Chapek's R.U.R., an impression of Terry Thomas as a shell-shocked colonel in an Ealing comedy, and Blind Captain Cat in Under Milkwood, which, being a radio play, requires little movement and less facial expression. The celebrated star couple, a mini constellation, are both on stage at the Luntfontein. What, alas, is in a name? theater, but they are not in the same play and not playing opposite, but against, if not past, each other. The Elizabeth, it looks more like Hackensack to me, theater group, headed by Zev Buffman and Miss Taylor, plainly chose this property for Burton and Taylor for its fan or gossip magazine value, and for the clientele that approaches theater in such a spirit. That's the ticket. At a reputed weekly $70,000 each, the couple cannot lose. Still, considering their age, ailments, and various current injuries that curtail, if not cripple them, David Story's home might have made a more subtle vehicle, albeit lacking the spicy parallel between the twice married, twice divorced Burton and cowards Elliot and Amanda, who can't live with or without each other. But it's not so much life as publicity that's imitating art here and doing it badly. Private lives has become as sacred as a profane text can, so that it's lèse majesté to make even slight, unseemly changes and interpolations, and not so slight and odious cuts, is unfortunate. And then with all those cuts, to drag out this brief, breezy play to over 2.5 hours, what with marathon intermissions for our stars to regain their breath, and not much shorter pauses between or within their lines. Still, one thing is achieved here. To anyone with an eye, ear, and brain in his head, it is conclusively demonstrated that Miss Taylor's short list of talents does not include acting. Even if certain audiences may accept it as a substitute, the collection of smirks, sneers, poses, vocal retards, sledgehammer emphases, inaudibilities, despite miking, arm flailings, leg twitchings, and the rest. Her entire film career is clearly attributable to her former face, her former directors, and the cutting room. And since she evidently cannot sing, a dance has been substituted for her on the unfounded assumption that she can do that. In fact, a number of line changes must exist merely to accommodate Miss T, who does not, either by physical girth or by technical dearth, belong on the stage. Call her E.T. the extraterrestrial. Thus, don't say any more, you're making me cry so dreadfully, with which Gertie Lawrence, even on a recording, could wring our hearts, is apocryphated into, don't say any more, because Miss Taylor cannot cry. Eliot's first act line about what the pair will do if discovered by their new spouses, run like stags, now goes, if he comes near me, I'll run like a stag, presumably because the idea of Miss T running like anything faster than a sumo wrestler is inconceivable, even if the change turns Eliot unpleasantly into a lowercase coward. In Act 2, Burton must stop at "come and kiss me, darling, before your body rots," and jettison "and worms pop in and out of your eye sockets," no doubt because the mere thought of those famed violet orbs becoming worm food is wormwood to the mind. Richard Burton, even before he started laying waste his sizable talent, was not much for comedy. Here, while his ex-wife keeps her gaze blissfully riveted on the packed house while serving up yummy double entendres, he seems to have affixed his beclouded stare to the vision of the weekly paycheck, which, like Macbeth's dagger, looms before his eyes. Though his voice is still that superbly muted funeral trumpet of a majestically dying swan, the rest of him seems pickled in a laboratory jar. The actor cares so little about what he's doing that he will mangle a famous lyric, quote, true to the dream I'm dreaming, becomes dreaming the dreams I've been dreaming, and even lose a natural laugh when identifying that sempiternal yacht as the Duke of Westminster's, I expect it always is, by running the two sentences together, with all those unwarranted pauses yawning about. Why stint on a needed one? Often, though, it is his co-star who leads him to ruin, either by not giving him anything to play off, or by seducing him into misreadings. Thus, the manifestly anxious, indeed heartbreaking repetition of, in love all over again, aren't we? Aren't we? Is fishwifed up by her as, aren't we? Aren't we? This induces Burton a bit later to append to you love me too, don't you? There's no doubt about it anywhere, is there? An extra, shrilly over-emphatic, is there? And whoever came up with the totally uncharacteristic and anachronistic, you're nothing but a rampaging gas bag, as out of place as the filter-tipped cigarettes and Burton's high-heeled boots, should have that bag over his or her head. Thus, though Milton Katselas is singularly a wrong-headed director and is credited with the directing, which unnamed others have refurbished, it is manifest that not much direction was taken. The fights, wittily choreographed in coward stage directions, are paltry and arthritic. And when Miss T starts bumping Burton with her bosom, and he bumps back, tasteless, the pacing and blocking are inert and inept. Even David Mitchell's set design may have been constrained by the cast. The partition between the two Deauville terraces has been virtually and improbably eliminated because no hurdle is low enough for some stags to clear. But the worst torture must have been inflicted on the capable Theone V. Aldridge, who couldn't have designed the geometric progression of horrors that pass for Miss T's costumes. Every outfit has a deeply slit skirt, revealing legs that generations of Hollywood directors toiled to keep out of sight. One dress, low cut and laced across the back, produces almost as much dorsal as frontal cleavage. And the last black and white number had me, for a moment, mistaking Miss T for the frumpish maid in some outlandish uniform. John Cullum as Victor is pompous and dithering beyond the line of duty, and Sybil, the usually able Catherine Walker, makes a complete visual and histrionic fool of herself. As Louise the maid, Helena Carroll adds a number of lines to her part in a French as inauthentic as the rest. I wish I could say that something of the play survives Miss Taylor's form and Mr. Burton's formaldehyde, but no such luck. One moment, however, may live forever in my memory. Alas, Burton, presenting a drink to Taylor, simultaneously tweaks her left breast. Done with even vestigial eroticism, it might have been questionable, but rowdy fun. Executed with no more feeling than the turning on of a bathroom tap, it manages to turn my stomach. All right, that's one private life. But now, a different one. Yeah, this is a much later one, and a much better one. If you have sat through as many private lives as I, and most likely you have, the question, why that again, might legitimately arise. But be advised, Howard Davies' staging, with this cast and these trappings, will have you watching a different play, hardly the same, but just as delicious. There have been some great Amandas, but never anything like that of Lindsay Duncan. For starters, she's so damnably attractive that not leaping on stage requires serious self-restraint. But then consider her miracles of timing, wonders of inflection, inexhaustible varieties of expression, also a range of movements from slinky pussycat to stalking panther, sudden changes of voice from seductive purr to skewering hiss, and an array of silences from pregnant pause to coquettish sulk. Note further a repertoire of sinuous body twists, suggestive lip curls, and a gaze that can puncture frontally, sideswipe smilingly, or reverse inward into enigmatic reverie. I have always avoided the phrase "to die for." For this performance, I can no more resist it than I can the woman herself. Eliot is usually played with Noel Coward's own silkily acid understatement. Alan Rickman, with a long repertoire of villains behind him, plays the sophisticated bon vivant with a smooth facade under which there lurks a tragic-comic clown with raw nerves and rough edges, straining to convert sarcasm into socially acceptable irony. This is not a slippery, world-weary cynic, but a self-muzzled attack dog, a barely cat-napping volcano, and all the more sexually challenging to the right woman, or the wrong one. And who could be more devastatingly wrong than Emma Fielding's superb Sybil? Not the usual dithering ingenue, but a flauntier of maidenly ingenuousness, a truculent wielder of ravenous innocence. Only the victor of Adam Godley is ordinary, except for his ears, but manages to make ordinariness jaggedly droll. As a labor-shirking, or is it xenophobic, French maid, Alex Belcourt contributes a saucy vignette. Davies has slowed down the Coward tempo from volatile volubility to fragmented fury and Pinteresquely creeping deviousness. That makes the second act drag a bit, but lends biting novelty to the other two. Caparisoned in Tim Hatley's stylishly sly scenery, Jenny Bevan's sassy costumes, and Peter Mumford's mercurial lighting, This Private Lives is a public benefaction, 2 hours that can irradiate a lifetime. I only wish Rickman would not throw away the line about whose yacht is anchored just off stage. The Duke of Westminster, who was rumored to be one of Coward's boyfriends, is the owner of that particular yacht. Now let's see, what else do we have here? Well, here's a review of a play that's now running in a new revival, so I thought this would be a good one to read. It's How I Learned to Drive. Paula Vogel's How I Learned to Drive benefits from an original slant: child molestation as an act of consenting partners, with the child as a willing participant. Miss Vogel acknowledges her debt to Nabokov's Lolita. She has written a memory play about a pedophile and his big-breasted niece by marriage. Uncle Peck and Lil Bit, names a trifle too apt to ring true. The driving lessons Uncle Peck gives Lil Bit over the years are a slow, careful, even caring seduction. When did Uncle Peck's pursuit begin? Was it the only one of its kind? What were Lil Bit's reactions? How did they change over the years? Was the thing even consummated? How did it affect Lil Bit's later life? What was the rest of the girl's family? mom, grandma, grandpa like. The play takes all this up in circuitous, non-consecutive, jigsaw puzzle fashion, no doubt reflecting the non-linear workings of the freewheeling memory. Or is this time tripping with much gear shifting from reverse to forward and back a mere trick to create suspense, when interest should focus on analysis instead? Is it legitimate to treat the rest of the family as caricatures? Is it fair to introduce a casual sequence of Uncle Peg's teaching a male nephew, unseen, how to fish, just to raise further troubling, unanswered questions? Does an ancillary episode involving the adult little bit with a high school student mean that because of all this, she too, the head spins. A play has every right not to answer the questions it raises. Most works of art don't. But just how many unknowns is an equation entitled to? At which point does writing become algebra? Thus Miss Vogel uses the topography and chronology of her own life for a little bit story. Is this done merely to anchor fiction more firmly in reality? Or are we nudged into speculating about her self-proclaimed lesbianism, even if we accept her asseveration that this is not autobiography? In any case, Mark Brokaw has directed inventively in Narelle Sissons's rather too schematic set. The supporting trio, Michael Showalter, Johanna Day, and Carrie O'Malley, does all anyone can, and the two leads excel. David Morse is an utterly disarming Uncle Peg, cunning pedophile and self-deluded good old boy in warm-hearted blend. Mary Louise Parker dons several ages from 12 to 35 with the skill of a quick-change artist and remains physically and emotionally truthful. Whatever its shortcoming, the play sticks more in your gut than in your craw. And now, one more theater review before I go on to movies. This is of Barrymore. Barrymore by William Luce gives you a chance to experience Christopher Plummer, the greatest living actor in the English language. It is a quasi-monodrama in which the legendary thespian, a month from his rendezvous with death, prepares to put on Richard III once more in a rented hall. Sometimes he spars with his unseen, sardonic prompter in the wings, well intoned by Michael Mastro. For the rest, he gloriously indulges himself. He does stagger through a pungent bit of Richard. Mostly, though, he sings popular ditties, recites risque limericks, executes a few dapper dance steps, tells racy anecdotes, impersonates his siblings, Lionel and Ethel, delivers snatches of Hamlet and other Shakespeareana, banters with the audience, and relives his soaring and plummeting career, his glamorous and clownish life. I have no idea how much of this is Barrymore and how much Luce, but I do know that it is all plummily pluperfect Plummer. On what other actor today have the gods lavished such gifts, bestowing equally the requisites of heroic tragedian, masterly mountebank, and matinee idol? His diction can cut glass, his voice, in its chamois mode, can polish mirrors, his vocalizing bestrides the octaves, dazzles or darkens, insinuates or thunders, and at every turn turns mere verbiage into symphonic music. Add to this uncanny timing that espouses every joyous tremor, every wistful modulation of the soul. And then the movements, bearing, demeanor. Though subverted by booze, this Barrymore is still an old lion, springy and sportive, ready to pounce on every passing one-liner or wring tears from licking his private wounds in public. The mode is somewhere between Gielgud and Olivier, with the Olympian poetry of the one and the Protean swagger of the other, yet imitating neither. In this acting, form and content are indissolubly wedded, and style is slyly conscripted into concealing style. Thus, humdrum material emerges as angelic descant, laced with heady distillates of deviltry. Under Gene Saks's lusty direction, this is theater. It would cost you far too much to miss. All right, this is theater. Let's try some film for a change. Well, let's start with a movie called The Postman of 1997. Indexes are very seldom accurate, by the way. It's a miracle if an index is really totally reliable, I've found, which can be very annoying. All right, this is a review of a movie actually called As Good as It Gets. You may remember it. James L. Brooks is a producer, director, writer out of television who knows exactly how to make crowds laugh or cry, or better yet, do both at once. He has not always been successful, but with films such as Terms of Endearment and Broadcast News, the great manipulator proved his mettle. He does it again with As Good as It Gets. This is a comedy about Melvin Udall, a writer of popular romances, an obsessive-compulsive, and a total misanthrope. He cannot step on cracks between pavement squares, hates women, blacks, homosexuals, animals, and people in general with equal comic ferocity, and eats his regular artery-hardening breakfast at a coffee shop where Carol Connolly, alone among waitresses, can endure his sarcastic tirades. She is the overprotective single mother of asthmatic young Spencer, of whom her easygoing mother, Beverly, takes care when Carol is at work. Melvin's favorite butts are Simon Nye, the young homosexual painter who lives across the hall, Simon's black homosexual art dealer, Frank Sachs, tough enough to crimp Melvin's style somewhat, and Verdell, Simon's pet Brussels griffon. At film start, Melvin, annoyed by Verdell's yapping, throws the pooch down the garbage chute. But you cannot worry over the fate of a bow wow in American movies, where unlike in Oliver Goldsmith's famous poem, dog is even more sacred than mom. Can you, my friends, guess what happens next? You may not predict that Simon will be roughed up by rough trade, those nasty straight hustlers who sometimes beat up their gay clients, resulting in hospitalization and slow recovery. Or that Melvin will end up driving him down to Baltimore, where his conventional estranged parents live, or that Carol will come along on the trip. But you will guess that Melvin and Carol will start falling in love until he dumbly spoils it all, and perhaps even that Simon's painter's block will vanish when Carol poses for him nude in the trio's hotel suite. What you will surely foretell is that after all sorts of tribulations, all will turn out for the best for everyone. How could it be otherwise when Melvin pays for a specialist's house call at Spencer's bedside, a privilege nowadays reserved for billionaires? You will in any case not worry for Spencer. Kids, to be sure, have come to grief in Hollywood products, but not ones of this type, where the comedy is about as good as it gets. The dialogue is lively, often bitingly funny, in this screenplay by Mark Andrews and Brooks, whose direction jolts as well as tickles. And obsessive-compulsive disorder lends itself to all kinds of sight gags, is indeed the most cinegenic of ailments. As enacted by Jack Nicholson, Melvin is, you may be sure, as lovable as he is hateful. Oh, those squinty eyes aglitter with deviltry, that high-pitched, nerve-fraying drawls that not only inflicts wounds, but also twists a smile inside them. Those somewhat bestial good looks. Everything about Nicholson makes you love hating him, and not even begrudge him the girl. And what a girl. Helen Hunt inheriting the part relinquished by Holly Hunter. The Hunt, I guess, is of the essence. Hunter, gives a great comic performance in the Irene Dunne, Carol Lombard tradition. Her Carol, more sexy than pretty, is both nervy and nervous, fiercely female and meltingly feminine, gloriously fusing the natural with the histrionic. Greg Kinnear, Simon, Cuba Gooding Jr., Frank, and Shirley Knight, Beverly, lend impeccable support, and John Bailey's camera supplies oodles of colorfulness. Final praise must go to the 6 canines who played Verdell, with Timer doing most of the donkey work and Jill most of the star turns. The tradition from Verdell's dreading Melvin to infuriatingly loving him more than his master is magisterially managed, whether by one dog or 6. I wouldn't be surprised if Brussels became as famed for its griffins as for its sprouts. Let's see what else we have here. Remember Kevin Costner's waterlogged Waterworld? In that apocalyptic stinker, post-Armageddon remnants of humanity jettisoned it up on the 7 seas. In the current Super Turkey, The Postman, we get a rerun on dry land. In the new dystopia, the United States is, by 2013, mostly unpeopled desolation, though an abandoned car, vacant house, or thriving township pops up whenever required to help Costner and the preposterous plot along. The actor-director seems determined to appear as the savior of the world, although the world has yet to figure out how to save itself from him. As customary, an army of vicious marauders, here called Holmists and led by the beastly General Bethlehem, terrorizes the few remaining civilized communities. On horseback, like the Huns, they exact inordinate tribute and abduct men for soldiering, women for lust. There is no one to oppose them except, of course, Costner, a loner who was forcibly conscripted into the Holmists but managed to escape. He finds in an abandoned jeep a postman's uniform and a pouch full of old undelivered letters. To get food and shelter from the surviving towns, he assumes the role of the postman, a representative of the supposedly restored United States government. Just how he manages to deliver the letters and even bring back replies is rather vague, but mail delivery spells deliverance for him and all. Before long, other young men and women are having him anoint them as subsidiary postmen, only to have Bethlehem and the Holnists vow to destroy them and those who harbor them. I cannot begin to go into the details of this after much last-minute cutting, 3.25-hour movie. But I can assure you that despite some unintended belly laughs, it provides little but self-indulgent flim-flam. Thus, in a sheltering town, Abby, a stunning young woman, accosts postman Costner with the question, "So as far as you know, you've got good semen?" It seems her beloved young husband has had, quote, "the bad mumps," which leaves you infertile. Postner, as for the sake of brevity I shall call him, hesitates, but when Abby disrobes and invades his bed, even he proves only flesh and blood. Conveniently, his good semen impregnates Abby on the first try. Later, her husband is equally conveniently killed when he tries to stop Bethlehem from carrying her off. In this ravaged but ideal world, Bethlehem, much as he tries to possess her, remains impotent. Rescued later on, Abby, much as he tries to remain faithful to her husband's memory, cannot resist the postman, just like those weak men who finance these doubtful Costner movies. Mention must be made of the wit in this screenplay by Eric Roth and Brian Helgeland. When the postman tries to persuade the people that order has been re-established, he lies to them about Broadway, again mounting shows by Andrew Floyd Webber. Equally fetching is the allegory as when Abby's child is presented as "my daughter, her name is Hope." Costner, a good father, has cast his real-life children in the movie. Costner is heartwarming as the reluctant redeemer. As Bethlehem, the Dick Cavendish Will Patton knows Shakespeare and Latin tags and smiles as he murders. As Abby, the young English actress Olivia Williams, is much more than Costner deserves. Imagine a fellow not above calling his monster movie by the same title as that warmly remembered intimate charmer Il Postino. Couldn't he at least have had the decency to call his film The Mailman? All right, so that's film. I'll now read you a little bit from a music piece, and then we shall have questions. It's not the whole piece. It's just the beginning of a piece and an end, and it's about a composer whom I adore, Gabriel Fauré, perhaps truly one of the most elegant composers who ever composed. This is called Gabriel Fauré. This is called Blowing Gabriel's Horn. In 1950, I was a Fulbright scholar, ostensibly studying at the Sorbonne, but actually learning from the city of Paris, which, as Rabelais noted, was a better teacher than its university. Returning from a matinee screening of a famous old movie, I was pensively walking down the cobblestone Rue des Vignes in the prestigious 16th arrondissement when I noticed a plaque on the wrought iron gate of a charming garden fronting a demure house. Here, I read, the composer Gabriel Fauré spent the many last years, I forget the exact number, of his life. My eyes teared up. Ignorant as I was, Gabriel Fauré was still an awe-inspiring name. The slanting late afternoon light hugging the cobblestones, and all those years in the same graceful but unassuming abode overwhelmed me. Recently, as we were returning from a recital by the cellist Janos Starker, I asked Starker and his friend, the restaurateur George Lang, who their desert island composer would be. While they debated between Bach and Mozart, I proudly put forward Fauré. Celebrated artist and famed restaurateur looked at me as if I had said Mantovani, or worse yet, spat in their soup. What other composer, I boldly queried, had such elegance, such good taste, who in a large output had never committed a piece of inferior music? In his later years, when he had gone deaf, Fauré occasionally let slip something a bit staid, but still not dull, a trifle mannered, but not unmannerly. Unlike the rather famous deaf composer, though, he never inflicted on us an assault similar to the grosse Fuge. There was in Fauré a wonderful duality. As his dates indicate, 1845 to 1924, he straddled the previous 2 centuries, managing to appropriate the best of both. He fulfilled the French promise of a lightness of touch, a twinkle in the eye, but nostalgia or melancholy in the heart, and a barely perceptible spice-giving irony. He could easily have become a gossamer Reynaldo Hahn, a solemn Albert Roussel, or a nationalistic Vincent d'Indy. All good, yet he became something better, Gabriel Fauré. And now, then I go into a discussion of a lot of Fauré pieces, and I end. Jean-Michel Nectou, the premier Fauré scholar, summarizes the composer's contribution as an extreme refinement of the classical tonal system, of which Fauré explored every last possibility, regenerated with the very considerable aid of modality. Clearly, the new variety of scales that could be employed and the many possibilities arising out of their combination with different keys resulted in an extraordinary expansion of musical language. Or, as Robert Orlich points out in the Bostridge disc booklet, quote, Fauré took the graceful mélodie, that's what the French call an art song, the graceful mélodie of Gounod, converting it into a work of art on a par with the German Lieder of Schubert and Schumann, in variety and emotional profundity, with the piano becoming an equal partner to the voice. Perhaps the only guarded negatively judgment of Fauré's music comes from an ironic concert review by Debussy. Quote, we heard a ballade for piano and orchestra by the master of charms, Gabriel Fauré. It was almost as lovely as Madame M. Hesselmann's herself, who played the piano. She kept having to straighten her shoulder straps as they fell down at every scale that was a little too fast. And she made the most charming movements whenever she performed this little task. I don't know why, but I associated the charm of these gestures with the music of Fauré itself, the play of fleeting curves that is its essence, can be compared to the movement of a beautiful woman without either suffering from the comparison, unquote. So far, Debussy. Let us, however, recall that Debussy, a great womanizer, was probably jealous. The singer Emma Bardac, his second wife, was Fauré's former mistress. Madame Hesselmann's was the current one. All right, so much for today, and thank you very much.